Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Lighthouse with your regular host here, me, Scott Sammons. I'm pleased, very pleased, to be joined by a lovely gentleman called Bruce Hallis with us today. He's a cybersecurity specialist with particular interest in awareness, behaviour, and culture, and has been in the industry for over 20 years. He's got a podcast called Rethinking the Human Factor, which we're going to talk about and we're going to refer to. So if you've not had a look at it, I strongly recommend you do. And he works with supporting many different organisations in this area with his company. Welcome, Bruce.
Hi, Scott. Thanks very much for having us on the show. And I was suddenly creatively inspired as I was listening to you. And you mentioned the lighthouse. I was saying, we need one of those weather reports in the background, Force 10. No. I was thinking we need something like that and then make it relevant to obviously data protection and privacy and governance. And I was like, yeah, you've got to get.
I'm wondering what would the weather report be on the state of information governance at the moment? Cloudy with a
Absolutely.
chance of rain, sunny intervals.
Force 5 in and that sort of thing. I think that would be an interesting, very creative twist and introduction.
I like that. I like that. If I start that, I'm going to credit you, and you'll get the blame or the credit, depending on how this goes. I like that. I like that. So, your podcast very much called the Rethinking the Human Factor,
Mm,
and very much with the concept of culture, cybersecurity in mind. So,
mm.
where did that come from? Rethinking the Human Factor. What's that? Where did that come from? What's the story about?
What's the story behind Rethinking Human Factor podcast? Well, basically, it's a spin out of a research program which I
Mm.
kicked off. Ooh, was it 2012?
Hmm.
So I've been doing governance, risk, and compliance, like a lot of your listeners. And I trained in law, so I was often somebody that was pulled in relation to data protection as well. Again, your listeners, your crowd, your audience.
Very slippery slope. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I came to understand that I was basically defining acceptable normal behaviors within any organization. So I would prepare policies and processes and procedures and all those great things.
Mm.
Um, and then in effect, what I was doing was writing down this is the behavior that's expected of everybody within your organization. And then because I actually did train in marketing as well, I did a combined honors degree. So I did marketing, law, and finance. Um, from a marketing perspective, I was like, right, now we've got to communicate this stuff to people and we've got to influence behavior, ultimately. And a lot of what I was seeing in the industry back then was even for me, from a marketing perspective, I thought there's opportunity for improvement. There was a lot of chatter at
Mm.
industry events and online, and people saying, is this as good as it gets, or can we do better when it comes to education, or what people then called education and awareness? And so I kicked off that research program, and that's an ongoing effort. But
Mm.
one of the things that came out of the research, or during the research program, I interviewed a lot of people. Like it was sort of most of them were outside of cybersecurity. Most of
Hmm.
them were people who are either academics or practitioners who specialize in
Mm.
human awareness, human behavior, culture, or practitioners, anybody from neuroscientists to organizational change specialists, from marketing directors for some of the world's best known advertising agencies through to brand owners, people that own the actual brand for a big organization, and their job really is to raise awareness of the brand and influence behavior in relation to it and shape into a culture. So I was
Hmm.
very lucky. I got to because it was so early. There was nobody from cybersecurity was reaching out into those domains, and because I guess I was a little early. The doors opened a lot quicker than you might
Hmm.
expect, and got to meet some
Hmm.
brilliant people. And that research program, I was like, okay, look, there's a lot of really lovely stuff here. How can we start to share it? And that's the podcast. And yeah, where are we now? We finished series 5. There's 60 episodes. Yeah, and this year we're going to be releasing Series 6. So that'll be coming out in Q4 later this year.
Right, okay, so it's going really, really well then. Well done.
Yeah, it is. It is going really well. I mean, it's funny when we look at the stats. Um, there are key trends in terms of what people are looking for. I think it's always interesting for me. There's like it is a very educational podcast. So we've
Mm,
got Dan Ariely, one of the world's best known behavioral psychologists. Okay, I mean, if you do a search on Dan Ariely, it's just prolific. So he came on the show. Took me 3 years to get him on the show. And then we've had Gert-Jan Hofstede. So anybody who's listening that's got a background in organizational culture, national culture, understanding how groups interact, etc. They're constantly referring back to Hofstede's work. So there's him and his dad. His dad did the work in the 70s. He's been carrying it on. Gert. So mammoths. These are legends in the world of culture.
mm,
And then we even had Bill Clinton's ex speechwriter come on to talk to us about, Bill Clinton, what does he comes up, his government
mm-hmm,
would come up with
mm-hmm,
policy, just like
mm-hmm,
your data protection policy or your security
mm-hmm.
policy. And then they had to influence behavior in relation to that policy. And so, yeah, well, I mean, it was a truly amazing experience doing the podcast and interview some great people. John Cotter was another one and another big name. So yeah, I've loved every minute of doing the podcast. It's getting back behind the microphone like you do.
Mm-hmm.
You just like, yeah, once the microphone is turned on, you got a great guest. And you're prepped and ready to go. It's a marvelous experience.
Yeah, and you get so much from it. You learn so much from it. And you think, oh, actually, that's a really good thing. Oh, that's a really good thing. That then sparks ideas for the next thing. It's just amazing.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, imposter syndrome. I mean, I've done a lot of research.
Mm-hmm.
So, 25% of my time from in 20, the years 2012 to 2016, 25% of my working time was spent doing just research.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a luxury that most of the people that I work with, people that are responsible for influencing employee awareness, behavior, and culture, whether that be in terms of data protection, cybersecurity, whatever, they don't have that time, and that's the one thing that I can help them with because I have the ability to choose to invest that time, and we've done that. Um, and even though I'd done all that research, when it came to actually speak, sometimes when you reach out to these people, I remember reaching out to Dan Ariely and having my first conversation with him. And I was like, uh, yeah, this, am I going to fall short here? Am I going to fall on my face? Um, but I didn't, and I think this is the thing about the imposter syndrome is the sense of even if I hadn't known as much as I did do when I reached out to these people to enable them to feel this person knows what they're talking about. I think if you can connect between their world and your world, and you can communicate that effectively, then the good guest is going to see that and they're going to hear it and they're going to
Yeah.
be intrigued themselves. And that was the feedback we often got from guests was, I did it because actually I had never thought about behavioral science in the context of cybersecurity and the connection. And you've drawn those dots together and it's enabled me to think I've learned something from itself. So yeah, sometimes we had guests saying to me, I've really learned something, which is amazing because, for us, it was always about the listeners learning from these great guests that we were able to get onto the program.
There you go, listeners. So we've been saying many, many times, and one of the motivations for getting this podcast up and running was about tackling that imposter syndrome and looking at the full rainbow that makes up our profession. There you go. You've heard yet another example of how even a brilliant behavioral scientist can still learn things
Oh,
and
yeah,
can
yeah,
indeed get imposter syndrome
absolutely.
like the rest of us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's just, I think it's one of the most, for me, that the things that drive me personally often
Mm,
are about reinventing myself. So, I did that GRC bit for
mhm,
10 years, and then I loved it and I really believed in it. But then I was like, I've got to find my next thing. And it came to me fortuitously because, I was doing education and awareness programs around data protection and security. And, we would invest big effort into making people aware of their roles and responsibilities, assessing if they're competent to be able to fulfill them. And then, the organizations were then, okay, we've done our job, and of course, the assumption is that people will then behave in line with those expectations, the promises that they've made. But I knew from a marketing perspective that consumer behavior sometimes defies logic, and I've seen that behavior in myself where I've gone to buy I've gone to buy something and I've looked at three
Mhm.
options and I ended up going for one option which my other half would tell me, okay, but that's more expensive. And I would go, yeah, but it's brand X. And I love brand X. And then suddenly
Mhm.
when you understand that, you're like, yeah, suddenly that's all about the emotional association with the brand. And it's that sort of value, emotional association that you think that's worth me paying extra for, quite frankly, the same product.
Yeah.
So yeah, another learning experience.
Every day's a learning day. So most of us will, when it comes to behavior, changing staff approaches things, getting them to do what they want. Many, and you hear this time and time again, many of us that work in data protection, cybersecurity, risk and compliance, etc., will often think it's like herding cats. You say
Mm,
something, they do something else. They see us as blockers. They go round it. It's literally cat herding in the
mm,
in the best way of putting it.
yeah.
So, what is the human factor here then? Is it the art of cat herding or something else?
When you were saying cat herding, my reaction, we don't have cats in the house, but
Mm.
we have a dog. Okay. And the one thing for sure that, I sometimes call the dog and the dog doesn't come. Yeah. Okay. But the one thing for sure the dog does come is when I put the dog food down.
Hmm.
And so
That
from a
specific
metaphor
tin sound.
perspective,
Yeah.
yeah, you're thinking of herding cats. Sometimes it's not about trying to herd,
Hmm.
it's about putting something down that the cats just get drawn to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be a metaphor for it. Um, but from a behavioral perspective, and from what your listeners, some of your listeners will have cats and dogs, I'm sure, but um, from a behavioral perspective in relation to employees, I think the approach that industry has generally adopted. Now, actually, let's go back to the law. So I trained in law. Data protection
Mm-hmm.
is in effect a piece of legislation stating this is the
Hmm.
acceptable behaviors in relation to securing these rights for individuals within society. Okay, around personal data. That's what legislation is. It's written down. It's like a
Yeah.
policy. It's written down. Um, and they the assumption is within the legal system, not just the UK's, in all legal systems, is that we say this is the acceptable behavior. Some people will be aware of it and some people won't.
Hmm.
Okay. But the assumption is that they will comply with that. Okay.
Hmm.
And then the model was, and if they don't comply with it and they get caught, in effect, then there's a penalty. Now that penalty might be, a fine, it might be a slap on the wrist, it might be being, put away at His Majesty's pleasure, HMP. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so you had this model, society built this model in terms of how we influence behavior. But actually, um, that assumes that people are going to be logical when they're presented with these choices between, sticking to the speed limit and not sticking to the speed limit. Okay,
Hmm.
that people will the actual choice, even though they know the consequences of breaking the speed limit to them personally, they know that it could potentially increase the distance that it requires to stop to avoid the person in the road, and so
Hmm.
avoiding an accident, even though they know all these things, okay, they still do it. Okay. I know in the UK, when I lived in the UK, and it's very different here, actually, I can't say the name of the country just in case I get into trouble. Um, but uh, but there's this thing, well, I can go 10% above the actual speed limit. It's amazing how good people are working at 10% above the speed limit because culturally, that's acceptable. Not
Hmm.
only is it culturally acceptable from the perspective of other drivers looking at you, okay, there is this understanding that the systems for controlling your speed or monitoring your speed and then issuing fines, they might not be accurate. So they have to have this slight variation in there, okay, to accommodate inaccuracies in the controls that are put in place. So culturally, the controls are also reinforcing this culture of um, there's a degree of flexibility about this. And so for people and how people make choices, it sort of runs into this, yeah, it'd be great if our employees were thinking and processing everything logically and they were coming to the same conclusions that we as data protection or cybersecurity professionals came to when we wrote this policy.
Hmm.
And even when they said, yes, I'll comply with it. But the reality is that most decisions that people make day in, day out are made subconsciously. And actually, when we understand that, we can have a choice. We can either make a decision. Yes, do you know what? We'll recognize that. I mean, there's Nobel Prizes have been awarded. You've got marketing agencies that leverage this stuff. You've got the Nudge Unit in the UK,
Hmm. Hmm.
etc., etc. So everyone knows this stuff. Now we can choose to say, no, we'll turn a blind eye to it. Okay, or we can say, everyone else is doing it, including cyber criminals. They use this newfound science, newfound, it's been around since the 70s and 80s, to be fair. Um, and so we can choose to say, okay, yeah, we recognize our audience, our employees probably going to be making judgments, decisions in relation to my data protection policy um, that are going to be more influenced by emotions and they're unconscious than all the good stuff we do within education awareness and our compliance program. And if you recognize that, you can then go a next step, which is, do you know what? How does that work then? And when you understand the forces at play that enable people to make those unconscious decisions very quickly, yeah, you can do something about it because you can use those same forces at play to
Hmm.
design your not just your education awareness program. We would say at Rethinking the Human Factor, how you design the whole working environment to increase the likelihood of compliance with a policy or a positive security outcome or positive data protection outcome. So that's the thing I think at the moment for herding cats is understand what the cats are thinking consciously, but also what
Hmm.
they're drawn to unconsciously. Food,
Hmm.
the ball on the string,
Hmm.
okay, a threat, those things, you're dealing with the unconscious, okay, but these
Yeah.
things have been wired into cats. It's the same with humans. We've been wired through the evolutionary processes, and actually, therein lies your opportunity. You can, instead of trying to make people work hard cognitively to to comply with your policy, you can use the unconscious side of things by just designing things in a different way with that in mind.
And it reminds me of two things. It reminds me of not everyone got this at school, at primary school or secondary school, but if your teacher ever said, "Oh, I wish my class was full of little Johnnies because they're very well behaved, they're very proactive, they help other members of staff, they're an ideal student." But that didn't happen. You didn't have a room full of little Johnnies, or in my
Uh,
case, a room full of little Scots. You had a room full of Fred, you had Linda, you had all these other people that were all very different, all behaving very different ways, motivated by different things. So some days it was harmony, depending on one teacher and how they did it. Other days, complete chaos based on another
mm.
teacher and how they did it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in the world of marketing, when I first started off in marketing many years ago, they realized very very early that there were audiences and that individuals have their own biases, things that worked for them. The
Mm.
world of L&D would say, it did that when it talked about, are you an audio or visual type
Mhm,
of learner,
mhm,
type of
mhm.
stuff, which, by the way, there's some strong research which suggests that that isn't valid. But yeah, I think, everybody has their own life experience, and that shapes what's important to them. And also, it shapes how they perceive the world around them. And part of that perception is what they receive from us as people responsible for data protection, cybersecurity. When we communicate to people and it looks great to us, it doesn't matter about how great it looks to us, you know?
Yep.
Um, we're trying to convince another 20,000 people that complying with the data protection policy or with this particular process, etc., is not just, you know, the right thing to do according to our corporate rules, okay? But it's the thing they want to do. Yeah. And yeah, so I think that perception, if you think everybody has the same perception of the same thing, you're going down the wrong road in terms of reality. But you probably could say, well, yeah, at least we made them aware. And that's that compliance argument, isn't it? It's the one that the
Mhm,
tick box exercise. We made them aware. We've got
mhm.
evidence. They've said that they've been made aware. Maybe we've tested their ability there to remember it, and maybe we've tested competency to apply it. Tick, 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 tick. Does it influence their behavior? Don't know. And that's it. I mean, some people would say don't know and don't care. I don't necessarily agree with that. I just think that
Yeah.
um, education and awareness on its own. If you listen to the podcast, we've got an educational psychologist. She talks about
Mhm.
the realization within the world of education that are we training people to actually get a qualification, or are we training people to get the qualification and to go and do things differently in society for the benefit of society? And I think that's a really interesting sort of way of looking at it from a data protection cybersecurity perspective. What is it we want? Do we want them to have
Yeah.
the badge, or do we want them to actually change how they behave when they're out in the workplace and bring benefits to the workplace and to society?
You often do. Second thing it reminded me of, and that leads me into the next point, was I'm currently reading a book by Kate Fox called Watching the English, where she kind of challenges this. I don't know if you've read it before. It's a
No,
fascinating
no,
book.
no, no.
Highly, highly recommend, because she's challenging this notion that English culture doesn't exist, or it's being washed out or erased, or any of that nonsense that's doing the rounds. So she studied all sorts of elements of humour of English culture. So from queuing and the British or English obsession with queuing,
Yeah.
right the way through to, so the most recent one has been about cooking and our food habits.
Right.
Looks at the lot and tests it. So she'll put herself in situations, social situations, and test to see what's going on. And that sort of culture piece about, well, if you have an environment in England, say,
Mhm.
then certain culture pieces will creep in and they'll be very predominant and very strong. You go to an office in Spain, an office in America, an office in India, very different responses, very different understandings of what is work, approaches to work,
Yeah.
seriousnesses of work, all sorts. It
Yeah.
changes quite dramatically. And it's a really good, interesting book. You find yourself laughing along like, yeah, I do that. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
that. That's true, isn't it? We do that, don't we? And you then see examples of it wherever you go. So English culture is very much alive. If anyone says it's dead, it's not. It's very much alive. And
It's
this
a
book takes you through it. It's really fascinating. But anyway, that relates to my point of the point of if it's a factor then as to determining outcomes and behavior and what we want people to do, because a policy is only as good as what it's under how it's understood and how it's implemented. What are the sorts of factors for determining that human factor? And what sort of things do we look for? Positives, negatives, etc.
ooh, right. I need to be clear on the question, yeah. Are
Yeah.
you talking about when you the sort of thing, all right, when you say the sort of things that we're looking for, is that about behaviors or is
So, for example, like as a good example, a really good example, one particular organisation I worked for, won't obviously name which one. Their culture was very legacy. So they had like fourth, fifth generation staff. Their culture, when it came to things like policies, procedures, that sort of thing, was very ingrained in a certain way. If you didn't do it a
mm,
certain way, if you didn't badge it a certain way, if it wasn't done the company way,
mm,
then it would be ignored. It would be discounted, very much
right.
so. Anything that wasn't done the family way, if you like, was
Yeah.
ignored completely. It was very unique to that organization. Anywhere
Yep.
else, not really a factor, not really a thing, but it's something that definitely influenced how you
Mm,
went about getting changing staff behavior, getting them to do things, respond to things, etc. That's a factor on
yeah.
that particular culture. But is that typical, or other things we're
Oh
looking
yeah,
for?
I think I mean there's a phrase that I use which is not mine. I always like to credit people who I've read and then I've seen something and
Mm,
I've gone, yeah, I'm going to live with that, you know. So this is a quote by Edgar Sheen, and
mm.
not Sheen as in the online retailer. This is the Sheen before the online retailer, yeah. He had his quote effectively says, um, it's about understanding the forces at play. Okay. And if we don't understand the forces at play, we become subject to them,
Ah,
right?
mhm,
So, and this is what the work at Rethinking the Human Factor, we focus in on awareness and behavior and culture. And what we've done, all our research was about understanding what are the forces at play in relation to how you achieve and maintain awareness, okay, how
mhm,
you um, influence behavior, how, and how cultures are formed and influenced and their role on shaping culture, on shaping behaviors, influencing behaviors and awareness. So everything we did was about understanding the factors, the forces at play, okay, around those three things. And I think that one of the things that came out of that research was stuff that you just sort of highlighted to when we did the more cultural based research work that we
mhm,
were
mhm,
doing.
mhm,
I mean, you've mentioned there, so for example, you'll get a national culture, yeah, and a lot of Hofstede's work was very much in the national culture category.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And then within a nation state, there's a whole infrastructure set up. Okay, it's the governance infrastructure.
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm,
um, and that governance infrastructure, okay, will in itself have its own culture, and you could call that organizational culture. Yeah, but then you
mhm,
have the world of education, which is responsible for, you know, the upbringing of our children from nursery all the way through past university, that type of thing. So, and that education has its own culture. Okay. So you
mhm,
get organizational cultures, you get this governance national level culture, then you get these different cultures in different organizations. And then you obviously get organizations where, um, yes, it's a family run and it's in third, fourth, fifth generation. Okay. But then you'll have another organization which has, a board, and the family sold out, went and lived their lives. Okay. And then it's a case of, all right, now we've got a corporate board, none of whom were actually there at the beginning.
mhm,
Okay. None of whom put the blood, sweat, and tears into, you know, to bringing a vision to fruition. Okay,
mhm,
none of whom actually, you know, um, came into the organization as a result of the fact that there's a blood connection with the elders, and maybe they're being given the responsibility, and it's a big responsibility to not kill this great thing that we built. Okay, that's really hard. I mean,
yeah,
from a family man, that was it. So there's so family, corporate, different cultures, but still the same thing. It's a business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there might, there are different values. There will be just different values, attitudes, and beliefs at play in those organizations. But even within the organization, I was listening to and a chat with Ed Tucker, who was a guest on the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast, series one.
Mm.
And he was reflecting on the fact that even departments have their own culture. So, if you trained in law, you are you are brought up, you are trained in a particular way of thinking. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If if you trained in marketing, it was very different. Okay. And finance again. So, there's all that little, people, we sort of stereotype people in different departments, for example, based
Mm-hmm.
upon our own perception. But actually, there are these slight cultural differences. And one of the biggest things that affects things is our own lack of awareness of ourselves. So I was given a book, and looking in front of me right now, it might be on the shelf there. There it is. Got it. Fish Can't See Water. Okay.
Ah, yeah,
And it was given
yeah.
to me by um, the ex-CISO for Maersk and Andy. And Andy gave that to me after we'd had quite a few conversations around culture. And he said, look, you should read this. It was something that the board at Maersk gave to him to read. And it was all about how we don't see our English culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't recognize it we either come into conflict with something else. So when I moved to France, suddenly there were things that were just normal in the UK were not so normal over here in France, and had different ways
Mm-hmm.
of doing something which resulted in the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like and I'm not going to actually, because I'll pull all the negative stuff out, but the important bit is that from a cultural perspective, we don't see our own cultural values, etc., until we come up against something which has different values associated with that. And then suddenly we're like, okay, now it's interesting because those are factors at play, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
between the sales and the finance function or the marketing and the security function. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
there are values associated with which come from those departmental cultures and professional cultures, which sometimes rub.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't understand that they exist, if you don't understand that your own perception of what's going on is influenced by your own cultural values, attitudes, and beliefs, and therefore you might not be seeing it the same way as somebody else, then that really is a major force at play. Yeah.
I'd agree with that. And funny enough, when we were just talking beforehand, we were talking about, because you said you've got marketing as part of your degree, you did marketing as well
Mm.
as law, etc. I, about 12, 15 years ago, started doing my digital marketing diploma because I saw it as, right, I'm going to study the enemy. They're the enemy. Is it Sun says know your enemy, that sort of thing?
Yeah,
It was a
yeah,
right,
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
get to know the enemy. I'm going to get to know marketing because they're the enemy, therefore I need to understand their ways. And actually, when I did it, I got a lot from it. It was
Mm.
really informative. I learned a hell of a lot about nudge theory, marketing, different digital marketing strategies, the benefit of them, etc. It opened my eyes much more to just this isn't just studying the enemy. This is actually incredibly useful for all sorts of different practical applications.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the reason why that book is so widely read, is that a lot of um, you get tempted to think of that within the context of military and military
Mm.
management, but actually a lot of military management is just
Mm.
management.
Mm.
Um, and there's a book by Aristotle that I've read. So this is going back some distance, called Rhetoric.
Mm.
And Rhetoric is a book which is all about the power of influence, really. By using rhetoric to persuade an audience. And the thing is, when you read that book, so much of that, when you've done enough of reading, you can start to see how Aristotle's thinking has influenced, whether consciously or unconsciously, and has come up. It's a really interesting book. It talks about the different approaches, and it breaks it down into, I think it's four,
Hmm.
which is, a marketer would tell you now that's too simple. Nowadays with data, with access to data, we can break it down into thousands and thousands of that. Facebook do. They do it on a per person basis, don't they? At the end of the day. Yeah. So yeah, and marketing. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that you did. I mean, first thing, congratulations for doing the course because I think within the security industry, maybe less so
Mm.
data protection, there's this there's this focus upon the traditional training providers who actually, if you think about it, it's like if my job is to try and influence behavior in relation to data protection, that's what can I learn from somebody else who influences behavior in terms of, I don't know, consumer products or
Hmm.
consumer services or whatever it is. I've had some great conversations with people that influence behavior in terms of oil rigs and other type of health and safety professionals. I think
Oh.
it's one of the best ways of learning because one, you
Yeah.
learn something about within the context of what you do, but
Hmm.
two, you learn something about somebody else's job, another field, and I think that's really enriching that you get these two educational sets of value rather than just the one. So I think you did well to choose to go down the marketing. It doesn't surprise me that you suddenly started to get these moments where you're like, that's caught my imagination. I can see how that would apply, and that's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Also did which we've talked about on the podcast before, and I've mentioned it to a few people. Also went down the licensed therapist route because when you were saying about like our own biases or our own ways of
Yeah.
thinking, whatever, as a because I always used to volunteer for things like call centers and where you could ring up and speak to someone and get advice on something. You always used to do that way back when. So it's always intrigued me. So when the opportunity presents itself to do that sort of actually build on that a little bit more and go
Mm.
into more mental health and therapy, the amount of times my mind immediately went back to our world, data protection, cybersecurity, and went, ooh, that's quite interesting from that. That's quite interesting for that. Yeah, well, there's going to be that, and you could change that with that. Ooh, okay. So while, you learn a lot about people, their choices, how to influence them, not
Mm.
manipulate them, influence them, you get so much of that applies to what we do. Absolutely so much of it.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you raised the point of influence and emphasize that because I think when that's one of the big challenges that we face in the industry is there is the
Mm,
potential to cross a line, I think, in terms
mhm,
of how far we go ethically, in terms of monitoring people to get the data, to perform the analysis, to say, whoa, something's gone up, something's bad's about to happen, or something bad's happened. And I think that ties in actually with the world of data protection and personal data. You go, at what point do we start to think, hold on here, you know, yes, we could gather more and more and more and more information upon the individual, keystrokes of individuals, et cetera, et cetera. And we could use that to increase the likelihood of getting the behavior outcomes that we want as a business, which or as an organization, which is, to minimize risk to ourselves. I think I can see this on the horizon, this like challenge of the ethics
mhm,
around behavior. And that's why I think the whole thing about trying to influence behavior, trying to maintain to a degree that people still have choice um, rather than designing it, do you design it completely out of the work environment so no one has any choice about how they do anything? And
mhm,
is that a good thing for the workforce, humanity, quite frankly? Um, uh, and where do we find the little ground where we say, well, actually, that will stifle innovation probably if people can't
mhm,
actually do things slightly differently? How do they innovate? Um, yeah, so I could see that. And actually, one of the things we're doing at Rethinking the Human Factor, we're in the process of setting up an advisory board, and one of the things we're going to be looking at is
Mm.
the sort of ethics of behavioral influence within the context of cybersecurity. So yeah, watch the space.
Ooh, that'll be interesting. All right, yeah, definitely, definitely keep an eye on that. Always remember there was one person that I worked with at a particular organisation, and you asked the question, why did you get into data protection? Because you're causing problems. The business is fighting you every step of the way. Nothing's working as it should. It's a constant, unnecessary battle. So, why did you get into this profession? You're clearly not enjoying it. You're not happy. There's loads of different things wrong. Why did you get into it? And then they were quite open and honest. They said, "Oh, I like saying no. I like the power." You're like, "But, that's not really how it should be. I don't think this is a profession for you. This is not what it should be."
Well, the thing is, you just you're if you look at any population and if you somehow were able to do sort of a personality test on everybody in the population, people are all going to fall into their own particular areas.
Mm,
And people get recruited. Some people are more inclined to go a particular path. Yeah, I mean, we see that when we did the cultural research, and we're seeing how cultural values get embedded into people
mm,
from
mm,
the
mm,
very first day of birth, in effect. Well, the second day probably more than anything. Um, and then when you start to develop those streams of people that are going, well, they're going down the STEM route, they're going down the, soft skills, social sciences route, etc. And even in that process there of separating, you suddenly your world becomes super concentrated into STEM, social science. And what attracts people to STEM, the social science, okay, then there becomes a common denominator, and the values and attitudes and beliefs within those groups get reinforced by the fact that they're in those groups.
mm,
Yeah. So it gets stronger and it gets stronger. Um, and there'll be good and there'll be not so good things. Well, when I say good and not so good, what I mean is in different contexts, something that could be good can be bad. And in
mhm,
another context, it can be good, it could be bad, but it could be good. And part of the challenge is, you're going, that's the management challenge. That's okay, how do I manage these people? Because
mm,
if they're people that like to say no, well, sometimes you do have to say no. But maybe you don't put those people at the front dealing with, the customer at the end of the day. And I think within cybersecurity, we've faced that challenge for a while now, where
mm,
we are really brilliant technical people. I mean, totally amazing technical people. When I'd listen to them, I go, oh, "Whoa, that's just completely over my head."
mhm,
Okay, and then you find the people who can communicate between them and their awesomeness and me in my complete ignorance, okay, of you know IP stack protocols or whatever, okay,
mhm, mhm,
and that's where I think you do draw on people. So you can have people with that quite strong, yeah, okay, and then you have other people that sort of surround them and become like the middleware into the customers, where that's where the stronger the strength in empathy and communication and working things through is more like a political ambassador. I've got some bad news, but let me communicate you in a way that you're going to think that's okay. You know, yeah, that, that,
yeah,
that takes a different person, and that's why
yeah,
we have teams. And so my
yeah,
sympathy with anybody responsible for data protection or cybersecurity that works entirely on their own is,
mhm,
you have to be the jack of all trades, which makes it very hard for you to make progress in any particular direction.
I agree with that. So the human factor is lots of moving parts, lots of different elements, depending on your size, what you've got, the elements that are at play, some of them internal, some of them external, and is a moving is
Mm.
beast the right word? Is a moving engine, lots of mechanical parts, lots of different elements and bits.
Yeah.
That then would, because we're very much about right, where to begin. Because for some people, this is a yes, I recognize a lot of what you're saying. I've
Mm.
read those books, I get it. I'm going to go and find out more and know what to do.
Yeah.
Those that are, oh, this is news to me. This is interesting. Ooh,
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. What would you say is if someone wanted to learn more and incorporate it into what they're doing, whether
Yeah.
they're a person on their own or a team, what would your tips be for them? Where could they go? Where do they go? Where could they start?
Okay. Well, I mean, the most rewarding experience for me and part of the research program was to step outside of the sort of cybersecurity data protection industry. And in fact, I remember I think it was at InfoSec, and
Mm,
somebody asked me for a recommendation. I was on the stage, and they asked me for a recommendation about, events to go to, conferences to go to that specialize in the human. It wasn't even called the human factor back then. It was definitely just education and awareness. And I was talking about behavior and culture. And I said, well, I'm probably going to get shot for this, but stop coming to security conferences. And they were like, and I know, not the right thing to say at the
Mhm,
at InfoSec,
mhm,
and it wouldn't be the right thing to say at any of the data protection or governance conferences. But the reality is, my most rewarding research, where I got double the value, okay, was by going to marketing conferences. It was going to behavioral science conferences. It was reading widely outside of cybersecurity and data protection because I've
mhm,
worked in that
mhm,
field as well. Um, and that was really rewarding because understanding it without the data protection hangover or the cybersecurity hangover and the things that influence our industry, understanding and then bringing it back and then using my expertise. Your listeners have got expertise in data protection, governance, risk. Okay, right. We don't need to convince you around that. We don't need to upskill you on that. But the whole
mhm,
human awareness, human behavior, culture, in our research, when we looked at people that had those roles responsible for that, I think we're saying like 96% of people that didn't actually have any formal training at all. Okay, now that was a long time ago when we did the research back in 2012, 2014.
mhm,
Okay, but the bottom line is once you get that level, when you get a foundational level of knowledge, and we do a foundation course,
mhm,
and when we speak to other people that have been to other courses like focusing on behavioral science or culture or whatever, they always come back and say it completely reset one, the objective as I see it currently, and now I've got a new way of looking at that. And two, now I have a new idea about how we can go around influencing those things without having to invest in another platform. Okay,
mhm, mhm,
which is immense because platforms, computer-based training, and slowly how they're creeping forward and moving into risk management, etc. These platforms are they deliver a value, and some of them are better than others for sure. But they're a really big investment. And actually, there's a risk that you end up strategically becoming so embedded with a particular vendor, okay, that when you decide you want to move somewhere else, for whatever reason, you suddenly realize that your strategy for managing risk associated with employee awareness, behavior, and culture is not your strategy.
mhm.
It's somebody else's strategy, and you paid them for it. Yeah. So I mean, that to me is something we got to keep a key eye. Develop your own approach to awareness, behavior, and culture. Go out there, go to other events, outside of cybersecurity and data protection. I guarantee you'll find that so rewarding, and you'll be able to have conversations with your colleagues outside of the data protection department, the cybersecurity department. You'll be able to go and speak to marketing and talk to them about behavioral science, and they're going to love you because they're going to, wow, that's what we do.
Mhm.
And you're like, great, why don't you come and help us with this project that we're doing? Because we're really struggling to get people to, buy into and behave, to choose our product, the data protection policy, over something else. Yeah, totally rewarding. So that's what I would recommend. Get outside of the cybersecurity data protection industry, go to conferences and events outside of that, read widely outside of that, and get yourself a foundational level of knowledge. It doesn't have to be a master's degree.
Hmm.
Be honest with you, 1 year, 2 years worth of studying in one particular slither of, psychology or sociology or, marketing, that's it's possibly too much. And also it doesn't give you a more holistic view. Just get a little bit in different areas and move yourself forward by 10 or 15%.
I like that. I like that. We've talked before on the podcast for frequent listeners around your professional development plan and looking at those skills and those areas much wider than just the traditional data protection ones. So if you have actioned some of what we've talked about before, do have a look at that and look at those areas of what those things are outside that area that I can go and have a look at.
Well, it's interesting because one of the guests on the show was Richard Thomas, who's ex-ICO.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And yeah, he came on the show, and we had a
Mm,
chat.
mm,
Let's be honest about it. The responsibility, the ICO has the same challenges that your internal education awareness person has to a certain degree. The
mm.
ICO has to make you aware of your regulatory obligations. They have to try and influence corporate behavior to comply with it. Okay, and then they have to take into consideration that my job is I'm ICO for England and Wales. So there's a cultural thing going on within England and Wales, and the impact of that culture, whether it be industry specific or national specific on that. If you go and listen to the episode with him, I know that it. I think one of the things I remember being quite interesting is that I think he'd just written a white paper, and in that white paper, this was after his ICO stint, he was raising the question about how behavioral science might have a role to play in that regulatory environment, which is, I was really, really happy to hear that
Mm.
because that's something that we've been banging the drum on since 2014 when we first sort of really went public with the research that we were doing. Yeah. So ICO, Richard Thomas, he's on the podcast.
I saw that. Another lady you might want to, which we've spoken to, and she's really good, is a lady called Emma Martins.
Mm.
She was the ex-Jersey commissioner, now at the DMA as one of their commissioners. So come
Yeah,
back to the point you're on of data protection versus marketing. She's gone the other side. But some of the stuff she did in Jersey was very much this, working with kids, looking at different approaches to regulation that worked
yeah,
very,
yeah.
very well.
Emma's done some amazing work
Mm.
within the Channel Islands, and Emma invited me. Actually, they were launching a new strategy, and she invited me over to come and do a presentation with taking from that sort of behavioural background and the
Yeah.
cultural background, and yeah, Emma. I remember Emma bought my book. And I always thought when people buy my book, I'm like, oh, they're either going to love it or they're going to hate it. It's Marmite occasions. Um, but we're still in contact with each other, and she seems to still talk about the book. And every now and then, I'll get a notification on LinkedIn, and it's Emma pointing people towards the book and the impact that it had on her and her team. So yeah, I know her forward thinking. Yeah, very, very forward thinking in relation to the ICO, but also just a really, really nice person at heart as well.
Agreed. Well, there you go, listeners. If you are, many of you have listened to, been to, seen, or read some of Emma's stuff. If Emma does it, then that's an endorsement in our industry. Can't think of a higher one.
Yeah. I don't know if she was using it. She couldn't have been using it to hold the other books in place because it's a really thin book. It would just fall over. So I'm rather hopeful that, or maybe it got lost in between all the other books. I don't know.
Well, we'll be putting links to so on this episode, we'll put links to all the stuff that Bruce has mentioned today. So if you do want to go and read more, you can do. But that's pretty much everything we've got time for. So thank you, Bruce, for your time. Brilliant conversation. Really appreciate you coming and sharing your insights. And yeah, we'll share some links with everyone so you can go and find out more accordingly. Thank you all. Thank you, Bruce. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you've got any other suggestions or even things that you've found that have been quite useful in the world of the human factor. Then do comment and share it as well, and we'll share them with everyone accordingly. Otherwise, that's everything. Thank you again, Bruce. See you all soon.
Thank you.